I still keep a relatively small collection. I have a permanent collection of 7 animals. In addition, as I mentioned, I'm caring for some of the animals that are part of our Herping Quest breeding project of Great Basin gopher snakes. I am going to show you my 7. Some people have asked to see my collection. Some of my collection has been in our videos, but I'm always taking them to Jason's place. So we're going to get into the snakes. I'm going to show you the 7 that are currently part of my permanent collection at this point. This is Kambai. Kambai is a 13-year-old green tree python. He's a male. And green tree pythons for a number of years were the snake. They were my bucket list snake for years. For a long time in the hobby, as many of you know, they were imported. They were very expensive. It was typical for people to have health problems and other issues with them. So I held off. I held off on getting a green tree python for a very long time. Let's turn him so you can see his face. He is a high yellow biak, so even though he's 13 years old, he's not going to lose all of his baby color, his yellow. Kambai is like most green tree pythons. He kind of has a Jekyll and Hyde personality. During the day like this, he's pretty chill, pretty mellow. As soon as his light goes out in the evening, he's all about food. I often joke that if he poops after lights out, it's going to wait till morning to get dealt with. What's really impressive about him, and I don't know how well you can see it in this indoor lighting, but these diamonds on his back are blue. His all of his heat pits on his face are outlined in blue. I take him outside in the summer as I do all my snakes, and in the sunlight, those blue colors are just amazing. They just pop. But the only snake in my collection that I don't handle regularly, I typically handle him on his perch like this. This is Shawnee. Shawnee is a locality animal. He's a Kankakee bull snake. Shawnee is over 6 feet long at this point, about 6.5 feet. If you've been watching our videos, you've seen him in some of our earlier videos. And he is a snake that we take on our urban snake educational outings, where we take snakes out in the streets and interact with the public. Great temperament. Shawnee is one of those snakes that goes with us. He is absolutely beautiful in my opinion, and he's indicative of kind of the northern bull snakes in the United States. So Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, oftentimes they're referred to as black bulls, and you can obviously see why. But the black and gold, just gorgeous. Absolutely love him. And his temperament is amazing when we take him out in public. This is Shawnee. This is Hidalgo. Hidalgo is a northern Mexican pine snake, a Janai. And he is coloring up really nicely. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with this species, when they are born, very plain browns, tans, blacks, and they brighten up nicely, these bright orange colors, yellows, reds. It's unbelievable, and they just get more beautiful as they get older. And again, you may have seen him in some of our videos, and he is another snake that we take out on our urban snake educational videos. And great temperament. If I were to walk into my snake room, he is the guy that I would bet is going to be in his hide. He's a little more of a hider. He's also interesting in the sense that he will, when he sheds, not only does he retreat into his hide, but if you guys are familiar with kind of a pituophis behavior, they will crook their necks, and it's almost like an excavator. They can pick up substrate and move it around, and I'm sure in the wild it's something they do when they're maybe digging a nest site or helping to excavate a burrow a little further. He will actually pile the substrate up in front of his enclosure. So in terms of just his day-to-day, he does cruise, and particularly in the couple days leading up to feeding day, you'll see this guy out and about. But He also likes his privacy. He just likes to disappear into his hides, sometimes for a couple, 3 days at a time. What I love about his pattern, it's not uncommon for Jani to have this kind of reduced pattern on the front third of their body, but his is very muted, almost kind of pixelated. These saddles are very faint up front, and then they pick up and become much more bolder in the back. But absolutely love how he's coloring up over time. He's approaching 6 feet. He's about 5.5 feet right now. This is Hidalgo. This is Wakara. Wakara is a female Great Basin gopher snake, and she's the only snake in my collection today who's wild caught. She was a neo when we found her, and we were actually in search of some bigger snakes. There's an urban trail system here not far from where I live where people bike and hike, and my sister-in-law sees snakes on that trail all the time. She's terrified of them. But she reached out to my wife and I one day and said, hey, there's 2 huge snakes on the trail. And of course, by the time we got over there, we couldn't find those big ones, the big adults. But as I was walking through some deep grass, just trying to flush them out on the side of the trail, I saw my wife actually shouted out, saw her tail going through the grass. So I reached down, picked her up, and I have a permit here in Utah to collect snakes. I very rarely do, and my rule is no adults. I would never bring adults into captivity from the wild, but her being a little neo, we went ahead and kept her. So she's about 4 years old now, so she's about 4.5 feet, about 4 feet long. And here in Utah, that's pretty typical for Great Basin gophers. They tend to average about 4 feet. Her coloration is a little darker, and she probably has a little less contrast than a lot of the Great Basins that you'll see that are captive bred. Her tail is starting to color up nicely, some of the oranges here. And she's got kind of this line of orange that runs down her side. So interesting colors. She's on the darker side. And great temperament. I mean, from the very first time we picked her up in the wild, she's never struck, she's never bitten. So excellent temperament as well for a wild-caught snake, but she adapted to captivity very, very well and has been a fantastic snake. Wakara. This is Veronica. You may have noticed my snake names aren't typically very common names. This is the exception. This is Veronica. I don't know if you can see it, but she has a nice little V there on the top of her head, so my wife and stepdaughter named her Veronica. This was a snake we picked up at an expo. Obviously a California king snake, desert phase banded. She's beautiful. I love how kind of the white scales are also outlined in black. I think that adds to her appeal. Very good contrast, high whites and nice black color. Like I say, California king snake, I can't remember a time in my journey through this hobby where I haven't had California kings. They were one of those snakes, just the iconic look. And when I was younger, the fact that they eat rattlesnakes in the wild, that was obviously very appealing to a teenage boy. And so California kings have always had a special place for me. And they do incredibly well in captivity. That's why they're so popular and why so many people have them. Great temperament. Veronica has always been fantastic, even since she was a neo. One of those snakes that, always eats, always does well, and fun to handle her and fun to look at her. Very active. I mentioned with Hidalgo that if I walk into the snake room, I would bet he would probably be in his hide. Shawnee that you saw earlier, Veronica here, Wakara, very active. It's the opposite. If I were to walk into my snake room, I would bet that those 3 snakes are out and about and cruising around. And Veronica's no exception to that. About the only time she really disappears is at shedding time. She's one of those that will retreat into her hide. Veronica. This is Juno. gray-banded king snake. She is a Juno Road locality in West Texas, thus the name Juno. I started to talk about snake names, and my snake names typically aren't very common names. I love naming snakes in a way that signifies their locality in the wild. And whether they're a true locality animal or not, I like names that kind of point you to where the snake is from. So oftentimes that either means geographical references or Native American history and Native people's history throughout the world is where a lot of my names come from. So Kambai, the green tree python, on the island of Biak, the Native people who live on that island are the Kambai people. Shawnee for the Shawnee Indians in Illinois. Hidalgo is a reference to northern Mexican history and their battle for independence. Juno, obviously, Juno Road locality, and so we just settled on Juno. That was pretty easy and obvious. What I love about gray-banded kings, their beauty and their temperament. And just like green tree pythons, gray-banded kings were a bucket list snake for me for a long, long time, and I always wanted one. And I'll be honest, I don't know, maybe kind of a dumb man thing, but there were always bigger snakes that, for whatever reason, were more appealing at the particular time I was considering a gray-banded king. So gray-banded kings being a little smaller species, this is a year old, by the way, a little over a year old. Gray-banded kings are on the small size. You know, they tend to be in the 2 to 3 foot range, whereas a California king is going to be in that 4 to 5. And gray-banded kings, just for whatever reason, they always got bumped down the line. And when I first started getting into Pituophis, gray-banded kings were on my radar, and then I got distracted by Pituophis. So I told Jason last year, I'm like, it's time. I need to get a gray-banded king. So this is one of the Envy Reptiles gray-bandeds, Juno Road. She's about to shed, so it's looking a little dull right now. But I prefer these Blair's Phase gray-bandeds. So much variety in this species. This is a female, but I love the big orange saddles, kind of the traditional look you think of when you think of a gray-banded. So this is Juno. Lastly, we have little Cara. Cara is a South African word among one of the local tribes there for home or house. And Cara is a Cape African house snake. She's less than a year old. This is a species that I really only discovered recently, and I'm fascinated by them. I think they have potential to kind of be one of those next big things in the hobby. They've been popular now for a while, but I think they're gaining in popularity. And it's another species with a lot of variety. They're found all throughout Africa. A smaller species again, just like the gray-banded kings. So you're talking about 2 to 3 feet. This is a female, so she'll probably be closer to 3. The most appealing thing about these guys, now this is a T-positive albino Cape house snake, so she does have normal eyes, but their little heads look an awful lot like pythons, and they have that great pattern on their faces and varying degrees of pattern on their body. But she's probably going to be just a little more orange as she gets older. Her parents had a great orange color, and I like the pattern on this one. She's got a little more pattern than some of her clutch mates had. But those python heads, they've got the vertical cat-like pupils. They look like little miniature pythons, and great temperament. What's really interesting about house snakes, even at this young age, they are about the most entertaining snakes to watch eat that you're ever going to see. They are very aggressive eaters. They launch at their prey. They wrap it super, super, super quickly and super aggressively. Even the frozen thawed prey, they just attack it. They wrap it. And they're kind of a lively, quick-moving species. In fact, when you handle them, you have to be a little bit careful because they're one that'll literally kind of jump out of your hands if you're not careful. They're always on the go. A nocturnal species, just like the gray-banded kings. And what's interesting in captivity, my gray-banded king at only a year old, I start to see her more and more during the day. But Cara here, truly nocturnal so far. Rarely see her during the day, and in the evenings I always come in and see if she's out and about. Much more active at night so far, so it's going to be interesting to see in time in captivity if she starts to become a little more diurnal. Sometimes nocturnal snakes will do that, but so far very, very nocturnal and rare to see her at all during the day. This is Cara.